The following presentation is made possible by the generosity of Lester and Smart Incorporated and by the Southwood County Historical Corporation, 540 3rd Street South, Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin.
In past videos, we've taken you way back in time. And now we'd like to try something different. What we're going to do is take you back in this year of 2014 to a time when many of you will still remember.
If you're old enough, this presentation will bring back a lot of great memories and make you feel a little younger as you recall those good old days.
So come along as we drift back to a time when we had a vibrant Wisconsin Rapids that was the fastest growing city in the state.
So let's start out right here at this familiar 2nd Street location as we drift back in time. The year was 1973, February 25th to be exact. And what we are looking at was a part of a vibrant downtown East Side retail area, just as it was before the big box stores moved in, and friendly personal service was the norm. On our right was, of course, the Wood County National Bank, now known as Wood Trust Bank. Next to the bank, Schroeder's Ben Franklin dime store was a prominent contender for your small change in dollars. 5 and dime stores, as we called them, like this one, and Woolworths on the west side were especially attractive to young kids and their parents. Kind of a low-end department store. Mr. Schroeder kept his shelves and counters well stocked. If you can't find it elsewhere, try Schroeder's. Just to the left of Schroeder's was an entryway to upstairs apartments. Next, on the left, was the Coast to Coast hardware store. Coast to Coast was a regional hardware chain headquartered in Minneapolis. Locally, it was a mom-and-pop operation and did a very nice business, but it wouldn't stand a chance in today's market. Just across the street, the Gamble store was a very strong competitor. Further on the left was Brauer's men's clothing store. John Brauer carried a full line of men's clothing, from suits to socks and everything in between, as well as coats, hats, and gloves. The store operated at this location for many years. At the time, there were 4 men's stores in Wisconsin Rapids, plus Johnson Hills and Penny's. Today, we have only a small men's department at the local J.C. Penney store. Just another reason why we refer to our past as the good old days. These 3 buildings were owned by the John E. Daly descendants, Esther Hosvet and Viola Daly. But the handwriting was on the wall, and as these businesses faded away, the properties were sold to the Wood County Bank. The buildings were demolished to allow for bank expansion and parking. The John Brauer building was one of the last to go. The buildings were demolished to allow for bank expansion and parking. The sturdy brick walls had served the tenants well, but they were no match for the wrecking crew's hammer. The year was 1981, just 1 year after these properties on the west side of the street had been demolished to make room for our new Veterans Park, as covered in a previous video. Except for J.C. Penney and Daily Drug, all of these merchants are gone, victims of today's mass marketing. Now, let's drop in on the west side and check out some of the old West Grand Avenue landmarks that were so much a part of community life. I refer to it as Old West Grand Avenue since the properties we are dealing with were located on a section of West Grand Avenue that no longer exists. We've casually mentioned the Bandeline Hotel from time to time, and this fine picture of the building gives us reason to elaborate on the property. The location was great. Just a short walk to the Northwestern, Sioux Line, and Milwaukee Road passenger depots. We can't be certain when the hotel was built, only that in 1908, Mrs. August Bandeline came to Wisconsin Rapids from Watertown and opened the Bandeline Hotel. Her husband had passed away prior to that time, and she later married a Mr. Susek, listed as owner of the property. We are told that the hotel had a beautiful sitting room with fine furnishings and a large dining room. Some years later, her second husband died, and in August of 1923, she sold the hotel to Mrs. Cynthia Holcomb. Mrs. Bandeline retired and moved to Idaho, where she had a son who was a lawyer and a judge. The hotel was, by that time, operated as a rooming house on a weekly plan and served meals. Mrs. Holcomb sold the hotel in 1951 and retired. The Bandeline continued to operate as a boarding house and a tavern known as the Grand Avenue Tap. But the Bandeline name lived on until time of demolition in 1973. With the Bandeline building demolished, the Romansky Tavern building was next to go. Covered in a previous video, the Romanskys lived upstairs and operated this tavern for many years. They also had roomers. Looks like with all those windows, they could visit with the Bandeline guests without even using a telephone. Just beyond Romansky's was a small building that rented to a variety of short-term tenants over the years. And with that, we do an about-face to the south side of Old West Grand Avenue. This was the Dixie Bar, which we dealt with in a previous video. Next, this small building at 623 West Grand, while not too visible in the picture, was home to Millie's Cafe and Bernie Tyeski's first barbershop location. This two-story building was occupied by a variety of tenants over the years and last remembered as a surplus store. After the vacant area was Swaricks Tavern, where fine meals were served. Swaricks was especially known for their great chicken. And then there was this building where Doc Weller ran his optometry and jewelry store. Doc was somewhat of a character, well-liked, and he had an English bulldog that slept out front on the sidewalk and greeted customers. Next to Weller's was another vacant lot. Only a small portion of the next building here at 663 West Grand is visible in this picture. It was home to the Miller TV and repair business, where Gordy Miller sold Motorola televisions. Next was the Hiawatha Bar, which was owned by Van Kubishak and Leo Clavine. That makes 5 taverns in this one-block area. Obviously, the Hiawatha name was associated with the nearby Milwaukee Road Depot, where the Hiawatha passenger train arrived twice daily to carry passengers to and from Chicago, Milwaukee, and the Twin Cities. This was 7th Avenue, and this was the Marlene Lumber Company. For many years, this was the Kellogg Brothers Lumber Company. Marlene's had been located on 3rd Avenue South for many years, And when Kellogg Brothers ended their business, Marlene's moved in. With our camera located right about here, we get a side view of the Hiawatha Bar and 7th Avenue. This was Pilo's Barber Shop. The next two buildings were owned by John Bender and his dad. Benders were in the fuel oil business, and for a time, the first building was home to an automobile agency where Benders sold Crosley automobiles. Now we move south on 7th Avenue, where we are facing north. You see, 7th Avenue was a very busy and important street with numerous business establishments. This was the aforementioned Hiawatha Bar at West Grand Avenue. This was the Bender location. And this building was home to the Bossert Coal Company. Today, all of these businesses are gone. The area is now part of the Rapids Mall parking lot. Also in the location of the mall was this building. This was the original Centralia City Hall and Fire Station, which fronted on West Grand Avenue. On the second floor of the building was an office and the council chambers. The bell on the roof was perhaps used to tell the caretaker to bring up the horses or to call for volunteers when there was a fire. In 1892, when a new East Side City Hall and Fire Station was built at the junction of First and Baker Streets, this building continued to serve as the West Side Fire Station. We don't know what their names were, but this 12-man West Side crew manned the station around the clock. In this picture, only 11 are seated. The 12th man drives the horses. But imagine how it was. Where there are horses, there's gotta be a pasture and a stable. Sorry, there are no other pictures to show this. In 1917, the building was moved back about 100 feet to make room for a new city hall. In 1918, a new fire station was built on the east side on First Street North. The department was now motorized and one station served the city well. After 1918, the building was used by the street department as a storage area until it was demolished around 1975. Now, let's take our camera a few blocks north and east to this location on 4th Avenue North. You see, it wasn't always this way. So let's step back into the 60s and 70s when a longtime tenant occupied this building. It was the home of Gottschalk's Grocery at the corner of West Grand and 4th Avenues. Just behind Gottschalk's was the F.F. Bender residence. The next building, owned by Len Bethke, was the Montgomery Ward's Service Center. Next was a relatively new building that was home to Lee Barker's propane gas business, which also fronted on West Grand Avenue. At the time, there were no natural gas lines in the city, and if you heated or cooked with gas, this is where it most likely came from. Behind our camera was Len Bethke's Chevrolet and Oldsmobile Sales and Service Agency. Just off of 4th Avenue to the right at 440 Roosevelt Street was where Frank Benkowski and a partner ran their Eatmore Products Company. Eatmore specialized in wholesale meat products and Blatz and Budweiser beer. The white building was the warehouse storage beer facility. Benkowski and his partner also operated Consumers Market on West Grand Avenue. Back out on 4th Avenue, in this 2014 view facing northwest, we again go back to the way it was, not that many years ago. The corner building was occupied by Northern Auto Supply Company, an auto parts and accessories firm, and by a laundromat. Next was the Obermier building, a two-story structure built and owned by Bill Obermier, where a variety of tenants, such as the Red Bull Cafe, got their start. The back of the building was a warehouse occupied by Montgomery Ward. Bill Obermier was a jovial character who dealt in auctions, real estate, and anything else he could make a buck on. Now, let's leave the downtown area for a bit and move to an ever-changing 8th Street South. In this 2014 view, we are facing east in the 2000 block. On the left is a Pizza Hut restaurant. The large building in the background was the location of Shopko when they first came to town. Currently, the building is a furniture store. The rest of the area is a sea of blacktop. So let's go back, not that many years ago, when this was a beautiful grassy area and the location of Ebbe's Motel. Ebbe's was there even before we had the Hotel Meade and had a very fine reputation, even boasting of a television in every room. Ebbe's Motel, 2030 8th Street South. Moving further south, our camera is located in the Ace Hardware parking lot, still facing east as we take you back a lot of years. This was Ostriechs Motel. At the time, motels were usually made up of a number of cabins. It's hard to believe that this location across from Ace Hardware once looked like this. Back then, 8th Street was a two-lane road. There were no sidewalks, only a dirt path. So much for the motel business. This fine building at 540 3rd Street South was designed by local architect A.F. Billmeyer. Built in 1907, it was the residence of the Isaac and Charlotte Witter family until later years when they moved to California. The building was then occupied by the T.B. Scott Public Library until the Macmillan Library was built. Then, this fine building became the permanent home of the Southwood County Historical Corporation. So let's go inside for a brief glimpse of the way this structure has been transformed from a fine residence to a historical treasure house. If you've never been here before, you owe yourself a visit, and you are invited to return as often as your curiosity beckons, or to find the answers to some of your most puzzling questions about our Southwood County area. It's also a place where your input is important when you can offer an unknown glimpse of the past. So let's look around briefly just to give you a very limited idea of what you'll find. Here at the museum, you can discover much about our area that you never knew, and enjoy exhibits like the animation art display of our favorite son, Grim Natwick, the father of Betty Boop. Search through hundreds of photos and bring back memories and take in exhibits like a bygone grocery store. Tools and equipment from yesterday's cranberry industry. And what your grandparents saw in the doctor's office. You'll also experience the atmosphere of an old railroad depot where the telegrapher kept the trains on time. Besides all that, you'll meet some of our helpful staff who will cheerfully research our extensive files to answer your most complex historical questions. It's all right here in this magnificent facility. Come see us often and bring a friend. 540 3rd Street South. History at your disposal.
You may have noticed that was Tom Metcalf, who visited the museum recently seeking information on his Metcalf lumber building.
Now that you mention it, we haven't covered that old landmark in our previous videos.
Exactly, so let's make that our next stop. Here we are at 750 West Grand Avenue, home of the Metcalf Lumber Company. But it wasn't always that way. And once again, we drift back to the way you'll remember it if you're over 40, when this was the McKercher Milling Company. This is a Tom Taylor photo taken about 1932. But you see, it wasn't always that way either. It was about 1900 when Dan McKercher and Emil Grassier started their milling business at this location. They were very successful and from a small building continued to expand the facility, and this was the end result. In the 1950s and 60s, market conditions changed. The building was sold to Rounds Metcalf, and through a series of events evolved into Metcalf Lumber as we know it today. A forthcoming video will bring out the details on the evolution of this and several other local businesses. Once again, if you're over 40, you'll remember when this west end view of the Expressway Bridge looked a lot different. This was an extension of First Avenue that passed under the old Northwestern Railroad Bridge, through the park, and connected with same location that the park entrance is located today.
Speaking of bridges, this is one of the last postcard photos taken of the old steel bridge, which was built after the Great Flood of 1888, which destroyed our first wooden bridge. In the distance is our wonderful new Johnson & Hill department store. Question: when the new bridge was being built, how did people cross the river? The new bridge was built one lane at a time, as seen in this rare photo. So when the first lane was done, the old bridge was taken down and the second lane of the new bridge was completed. The steel from the old bridge was sold to Frank Garber, a local salvage dealer, for $10,000. For a time, traffic was confined to one lane. And how did they form those concrete arches on that beautiful bridge? This rare photo shows one of the arch forms that were constructed on dry land and floated into position to shape the concrete. Notice that an early snow covered the ground and rooftops in the picture. The year was 1922. When it was all done, this was our beautiful arched bridge. They don't build them that way anymore, but there's more to be said about this picture. Have you ever seen our Wisconsin River so still? What photographer could have resisted this shot? The woodblock, the Elks Club, and the Congregational Church are clearly reflected in the water. The first Congregational Church was located right here in the 700 block of First Street North. The church was marked by a tall steeple, which was later removed when the Christian Science denomination took over the property. The 125-foot steeple of the old Saints Peter and Paul Church is still visible on the skyline. Speaking of towers, we recently came up with this photo of our old city water tower, or standpipe as it was called. It was located on what is now East Junior High property at the southeast corner of Lincoln and Peach Streets. Many of the homes in this photo are still there. Off in the distance is the old Howe School on 8th Street. The tower was demolished shortly after World War II when new water towers were erected on the east and west sides of the river.
A few videos ago, we dealt with the demise of Life magazine.
Well, since that time, more magazines have fallen by the wayside, most notably Newsweek. In this, the final print issue of December 31st, 2012, Newsweek proclaimed that it was a time to look forward to a new chapter and to concede that sometimes change isn't good, is necessary.
But looking back to that very first issue in 1933, Newsweek editors reminded us that there was much to write about. FDR's election, the Depression, and Adolf Hitler. And so it was for 79 years, as each week this dynamic publication informed its readers. Newsweek referred to these covers as portraits of power, and indeed they were. World, national, and regional. Nothing that mattered could escape the Newsweek team. And then, with the advent of electronic and video media, circulation began to decline. Advertisers drifted away, and like so many other print publications, brought this once powerful news source to its final issue, December 31st, 2012. All of this has had an impact on the coated paper industry, and thanks to the foresight of our area paper mill teams, past and present, these paper mills are among the most modern and competitive in the world.
There's a program for veterans that has been going on for several years known as the Never Forgotten Honor Flight. Their mission is to provide a special kind of honor for the sacrifices of American veterans. They fly our heroes to Washington, D.C. to visit their memorials. Now, Paul, you took part in one of those flights. Tell us about it.
Yes, I did. It was a wonderful experience. There's so many wonderful things could be said about it, but I'll only be able to touch on the highlights. The year was 2012, April 17th. It all started at the Howard Johnson Motel in Rib Mountain with a pre-flight dinner and entertainment.
Make him the cutest that I've ever seen. Give him the word that I'm not over. Then tell him that his lonesome nights are over. Said when I'm so alone.
Like this.
At 4:45 a.m. on the 18th, we were on our way. Decked out in our yellow jackets, we were very much flight ready. As we left the gate, our plane was showered by the local fire department, and we were on our way. For some, it was their first ever flight. As we landed in Washington, another shower greeted us, as well as children of all ages waiting in the terminal. At the World War II Memorial, we were lined up for a group photo and greeted by hundreds of onlookers. Never in my life have I seen so many cameras in one place.
Good afternoon and welcome to our nation's capital. If this is your first time here, welcome to your memorial. I am Commander Greg Zerwanka, serving at U.S. Coast Guard headquarters here in Washington, D.C. May God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
After our fine introductions, our tour began. Needless to say, this beautiful World War II memorial was indeed impressive. In this area, a gold star represents each and every person who gave their life in the cause of freedom during World War II.
Represent different features and things that happened during World War II. 12 on the north.
From there, we were bused to the Lincoln Memorial area and the Vietnam Wall, where visitors searched the endless lists for the name of a loved one lost in that great conflict. There was much to see and do in this venture, with a personal attendant for every 2 veterans. And yes, we were well fed. The volunteers pay their own way on these trips at $500 each. Our next stop is Arlington National Cemetery, where we will witness the changing of the guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier.
Nurses.
No words are appropriate for this somber, monumental area. Here, at the Tomb of the Unknown, the changing of the guard takes place every hour, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, regardless of weather. The actual guard change takes the better part of 15 minutes, so we will show only a few of the highlights in this video. As we left Arlington Cemetery, we were off to our final stop, the Iwo Jima Memorial. This monumental base is topped off with the largest bronze casting ever attempted. A fitting tribute to all of those who gave their lives to conquer this small Pacific island against all odds. Once again, we were lined up for a final group photo. After a long and eventful day, it was back to our waiting plane for a relaxing flight back to Wisconsin. On the way home, a large envelope with letters of gratitude from school children was given to each of us. I responded to each of them in my envelope, and I'm sure others did too. As we arrived back at CW Airport at the end of our journey, we were overwhelmed by the huge crowd of well-wishers and organizations that were there to greet us and wanted to shake our hand. And that's how it was, April 18th, 2012.
No doubt you've noticed on your favorite news channel that the dome of our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. is covered in scaffolding. This project to repair the dome was started in this year of 2014. 100 years ago, in the fall of 1914, another Capitol dome was just completed and was awaiting its final touches. It was our very own state capitol building in Madison, Wisconsin.
Phil, my father, Chester Gross, was living in Madison at the time, a civil engineer employed by the state of Wisconsin, and at that time took, and most importantly dated, the following historic photos.
October 16th, 1914, 9 a.m. The statue that will top off the Capitol dome is uncrated. At 3 p.m. on that fine October day, the statue is placed on a platform. Preparing for the lift, the statue stands on the roof of the West Wing. At 3:40 p.m. on October 16th, 1914, the statue was lifted to its final location on the top of the magnificent dome. Prior to that time, other statuary had been put in place. This Chester Gross photo is dated June of 1914. And so it was that this fine structure is still the pride of our state.
Well, Phil, it looks like we've got another one all wrapped up.
So until next time...
Wait a minute, just a minute. You know, Phil, this may very well be the last one. I'm not sure. My eyesight has failed so bad, I'm finding it very difficult. So, I guess what I want to say is, I'm Paul Gross.
And I'm Phil Brown. Thanks for listening.